This is not for you. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is season 4, episode 7, and we are finishing up our series on new media horror with a discussion of internet and multimedia horror. So, for those of you that may not recognize the brief quote that Mel read as the intro, that was the dedication from Mark Danielewski's infamous, dare I say, House of Leaves, which I know has come up before in this podcast, sort of tangentially, but I think now is a good time for us to dive into it. But before we do that, I did just want to say that, like I said in this intro, that this episode is kind of wrapping up the new media horror series that we're doing by talking about kind of horror in the 21st century and the internet age and things that are related to the internet or exclusively to the internet, or in the case of House of Leaves, something that is so entirely postmodern that I don't think it could have come into existence except in the late 90s, early 2000s. So you've both read House of Leaves, right?
Yeah, House of Leaves it's one of my favorite books, period, but definitely one of my favorite horror books. And I don't know, that's one of those books that I think everybody needs to read. Like, just full stop. You need to stop whatever you're doing and read House of Leaves if you haven't, because it's wonderful.
Yeah, I also enjoyed House of Leaves. Someday I'm going to do a reread of it. I read it. Oh man, I was in graduate school. I think you told me about it, Matt, and I picked it up and read it. And I love postmodern, metafictional, mess with your head type stuff. And that is precisely what House of Leaves is. It has footnotes from sources that may or may not exist, and it's a story within a story within a story with found footage documentary of a haunted house that's being edited by one guy and then edited by another, and then personal stuff comes into it. Partway through the book, it kind of falls apart, and the structure of the book is like the structure of this house. And I mean, what it does with the haunted house and messing with its dimensions, just kind of, it takes what Shirley Jackson was doing in the late 50s with the Haunting of Hill House and just does all sorts of really cool, I guess now we think of like more 21st century thing. Not that the disappearing room in a haunted house hadn't been done before. It has been done in the 19th century in particular. But the idea of a house just like morphing on you, and new closets, new rooms, the 5.5-minute hallway, all that sort of stuff. And yeah, it's just it's kind of an amazing accomplishment to even print the thing with all the different fonts and colors and all that in it too.
Well, that's what I was going to say. One of the first things that I noticed about the book when I picked it up off a bookshelf in a Barnes & Noble, because I had heard about it, and I picked it up and it was kind of like just flipping through. And when you get to, I guess it's about 2/3 or a little further of the way in, when the literal text on the page is mirroring the story that's happening, and it like there are things that are upside down and a big square in the middle that's filled with other words and lists, and I mean it's chaos. And I was like, what in the world is this book? Because I had heard about it because I was familiar with Danielewski's sister, the singer Poe, and I had heard that Poe's brother is writing this book that's coming out, and so I stumbled on it in a Barnes & Noble and then immediately was hooked on it. And I can honestly say is one of the few books that I've ever read that really, really, really freaked me out. Like, I finished that book kind of about 2 a.m, and after reading it for hours and hours, I mean, it took me 4 or 5 days to read the whole thing, but when I finished it, it was 2 a.m. or so, and I still can't tell you what exactly about reading it freaked me out so much. I can't put my finger on it, but it did. So
it's one of those texts, and probably because of the way it's laid out physically on the page, it's a very disorienting book. And it's one of those few books that I've read that can actually, I read books that make me feel things emotionally, a lot. That's one of the joys of reading, is you kind of get transplanted into another place and another time, and sometimes even into another body almost. And so you get to experience a lot of things that you wouldn't in your normal everyday life. But there are only a handful of books that have made me feel things physically. And that was one of those, because I remember reading it and feeling, I'm trying to think of the right word. It was almost not a dizziness, I don't know. You know the feeling when you step off of a boat and you feel like the
I was
ground is moving underneath you?
I was just about to ask if seasick was the word you were looking for.
Yeah, like minus the queasiness, just the vertigo might be the closest thing I can think of. Just the feeling that you're kind of that gravity isn't working the way it's supposed to with you, and everything's in motion around you. I remember there were points in that book that I felt that, kind of along with the idea of this just kind of growing terror of what's happening, especially as you get into the kind of, I guess you would call it, the innermost narrative with the Davidson family, and it's that growing uncanniness that's kind of happening. I don't know, it's really good.
I like both stories, but I think I really enjoyed the documentary, the Davidson family's documentary, the best of the two. I mean, I know Johnny Truant is kind of the main character and everything, but sometimes while I was reading his sections, I'd be like, I just want to find out what's happening with the family. And I don't know that I necessarily felt the seasickness that you described, Lisa, but I totally understand why you would, because it builds on that idea of the uncanny that's so terrifying. I mean, I just remember that scene where they come back to the house. They've moved in and they went to a wedding or something, and they come back and there's a closet where there wasn't one before. And they're just like, what? Like, how do we even report this? Did some random carpenter come in? Like they can't even figure out what to tell the police. And it's like you totally could see yourself in that position. I mean, especially now that I own a house, I'm thinking to myself, if there was just some random, like I come home and my hallway is a little longer, but the outside of the house is the same, or I come back and I got like a new closet on the other side, like I'm going to be freaked out and nothing is even really happening. And so, yeah, I mean, that idea of like no rules of gravity or measurement or time or space or anything applying is just so creepy. And such a private horror too, because there's no way they can get any help.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Mel. And well, Lisa, I was also just going to kind of add to what you had said and say that with that sense of ominous dread, like you said, it's rare that I found a book that does that. And I think one of the only other ones I could think of would be Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, where you're unsettled and there's that growing sense of dread of what's going to happen, but you can't quite put your finger on where the dread's coming from. I think Danielewski captures that really well. And I like what you said too, Mel. I hadn't thought about that with the Davidsons as how isolated they are. But I agree. As much as I like the Johnny Truant stuff, the Davidson stuff was the meat for me. Like I kept wanting to hurry along and get back to what was happening there and find out what was happening next, kind of thing.
Well, no, I just had a question. No, because Matt, you brought up that you found out, because I'm pretty sure, like Mel, I think you told me about this book, or maybe Mel told me about the book after you told Mel. So this was definitely one of these like books that when you read it, you're like, I have to tell somebody about this. But Matt, you said you heard about it first because of his sister Poe. Have you listened to the album? Because didn't she write some inspired music to kind of, I don't know if it's meant, because I have not, this is one area I know nothing about. I read the book and I was obsessed with it. But I'm hoping you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Yes, I have heard the album. And I guess to give the backstory, if for those of you who aren't familiar with Poe, she had kind of a, I guess, minor hit in the mid '90s with a song called "Angry Johnny," and a girl I dated when I was in high school loved the song, and so I heard it a lot along with the rest of the album. And I mean, I always liked the song and the rest of that album. And so, I mean, I would never call myself like a Poe super fan or something like that, but I was familiar enough with her, and I liked her stuff. And so I remember, I think what had happened was that I had, and this is of course going to date me, listeners. So, yeah, this is going to give you an idea of how old I am. I had, there was a Sam Goody in my hometown in a mall, and I would go there frequently, and they had, at the time they had like little, like, newsletter kind of flyery things, like pseudo magazines that were more advertisement than anything that you could pick up like at the checkout when you were checking out. And it was mostly like, here's albums that are coming out soon, and maybe a brief interview with an artist or something like that. It was never a full-fledged magazine, but it was kind of somewhere between just a bunch of ads for stuff and a magazine. But I remember grabbing one and was just kind of leafing through it and saw, oh, Poe has a new album coming out. She hasn't done anything in like 4 or 5 years. And I was like, oh, I remember that song, Angry Johnny. And then, so that was actually how I heard about House of Leaves the first time, was because it was talking about her upcoming album that was, Haunted is the name of the album. And Haunted is like, in the liner notes, she cross-references the songs on it with specific pages in House of Leaves. I didn't know that at the time, but in the article that I read, they mentioned her brother, Mark Danielewski, had this book, and that, you know, her album was going to be kind of a companion piece to it. And I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. And it was like a couple months later when I stumbled on the book in Barnes & Noble. I don't think her album had come out yet, to be honest. And I was like, House of Leaves, that's that thing by that guy that's Poe's brother. And then I picked it up and, like I said, flipped through it and was like, what is going on here? This looks awesome. And so, yeah, that's kind of my story with that. But yeah, I've heard the album. I used to own it on CD. I probably still have it on CD somewhere. But I mean, it's in my Spotify library. So it's a pretty good album. It's late '90s, early 2000s, kind of like alt pop or whatever. I'm trying to think of a comparison for it, but to give you listeners kind of a sense, there's, when Mel mentioned the 5.5 minute hallway, which is the way that they describe the hallway that they find. Like she said, that there's a door that should open to the outside, but instead there's a hallway. And so the 5.5 minute hallway is them walking down there with the camera for 5.5 minutes and then coming back. There's a song on the album Haunted called 5.5 Minute Hallway. Not all the songs are quite as obvious in their cross-referencing of House of Leaves, but yeah, there's a lot of, I mean, like I said, she does actually include in the liner notes specific places to go in the book for each song that where they overlap.
Yeah, I listened to the 5.5 minute hallway song. I guess it was the day before yesterday, and it's a creepy little song just on its own without the reference of the 5.5 minute hallway.
It is. And
well, that was going to be my next question.
Yeah, I'm looking here. I mean, yeah, it's available on Spotify. I assume it's also available on Apple Music and everywhere else. But yeah, it's definitely an album that I'd say is worth listening to if you've read House of Leaves. It's worth listening to even if you haven't. But it's in 2019, I think it may sound a little dated by just kind of its influences and stuff. But sadly, I think that was the last album that she put out. I'm looking right now and I don't see anything at all since then. And that came out 19 years ago. So
Yeah, I was going to ask you if she had anything else because I didn't think so. Yeah.
Yeah, she's got her first album, the one that had that single "Angry Johnny," that was '95, and then she's got "Haunted," which is in 2000 or so, and those are the only two albums, at least, that are available on streaming services. And I'll be honest, I haven't heard of anything about her since then. But I'll be honest, I have not listened to the album while reading the book. That would be an interesting sort of meta narrative reading kind of thing right there. Interactive, if you will.
Yeah, I was just wondering because Mel, you had said you wanted to reread the book, and that book has always felt very timeless, kind of. Like I think it will continue to age well. It's a book that, even though it is kind of linked to that kind of very specific postmodern movement of literature, I think it will still be a good read years from now. But I'm wondering now if on one of these like rereads of the book, if maybe I'll try pulling up the Poe album and and trying to get it synced up when I'm reading the parts of the book.
And then we'll never hear from you again.
Yeah, and then I will just become part of it, and you'll be asking yourself, did we really know Lisa, or was she always a part of the book that we read?
And then we'll find a documentary about random spaces opening up in your house, and we'll just be like, oh my gosh.
Well, I'm glad you're both making the joke that I was about to make. So. Well, one thing I wanted to mention too, since we're kind of on the topic with the book and the album sort of cross-referencing each other, I think that's something worth talking about with the book too, since there is that sort of level of metafiction that it's doing, where, I mean, it's almost aware of itself as a book, and the footnotes that you're reading, it's like reading the comments of someone else reading it, but they've all been written by the same author, Mark Danielewski, but they're not. It's just such a amazingly crafted book, and it's sometimes, I think the word crafted is the best word for it, because it's not just written. There's so much more happening in that book that's sort of like almost like hyperlinks to itself within itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. Well, and while we're talking about its connection to like hyperlinks and audio albums, one of the articles that I stumbled upon was from last year in the AV Club, and apparently Mark Danielewski wrote a script for House of Leaves TV pilot, according to this AV Club article. And I think you can actually find the script online. And it sounds, from reading through the article of the person who read it, it sounds just as meta and postmodern and confusing as the book, if that's even possible. Apparently, like, Danielewski would even like appear in the show, as critics were arguing about how the found documentary about the Davidsons was actually real and not fictional. And then it kind of would just devolve into like pastiche and insanity. So maybe someday I'll sit down and read the script.
It sounds almost...
It's available online.
Is it?
There's a PDF online. He shared it through Twitter, I think.
It's actually like a Dropbox document PDF, and you can read the entire 62-page script of the pilot.
Well, the way you're describing it, Mel, sounds almost like a Charlie Kaufman movie.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. Apparently the director like pops in and hijacks the narrative at one point. I'm just going through the AV Club's article, and then there's also stuff from the book. So like the 5.5-minute hallway gets mentioned in the article. So I don't know. Fans of Danielewski might want to search this out and read it. I guess no one picked it up since this was from last summer in 2018, but who knows?
Well,
Nobody picked it up because it is unfilmable.
That's what I was going to say. Well, but
has that ever stopped people before?
Well, Lisa, I am so glad that you said that, because that was actually a point that I wanted to make too about the book. Is that I don't think that it would really exist if it hadn't been for the internet. Like, Mark Danielewski would have written it, but he brought it to publishers and they said, we can't print this. Like, how? And it got its life by being passed around on the internet. And this is like, early internet in the late 90s, 98, 99 or so. And so it was because of all that buzz that it generated on the internet that finally a publisher was like, okay, let's give it a go. But yeah, like if we're talking about the internet with horror, I think, Danielewski would have written House of Leaves, but it may not have been published in the year 2000. It might have sat in a drawer somewhere, figuratively, until somebody finally picked it up, which I'm so glad that the internet got it printed, because, man, but I like I don't know if this is actually attributed to him, or if he said this, or if it was attributed to him, but for his next book after that, his editor said that he had free range to make the typesetters cry. So
I can't imagine what the like actual publication of the book must have been like the physical. I mean, trying to copy edit that thing alone.
Well, now there's different editions with different words and different colors, even. Like, what was it? The house was blue and Minotaur was red, but now there's even more.
And like you said, Matt, so much of it is almost like a hyperlink to itself. It kind of is the serpent eating its own tail. That sometimes I wonder if somebody was looking at it, if they saw what they thought was an error, I could just see somebody looking over it and being like, did he mean to write it that way? Is that a typo?
Right. Like, it's not the level of Finnegan's Wake where you've got like multiple puns happening in several languages within words that have been smashed together that can only make sense when read aloud. It's not quite that level of insanity, but it's pretty darn close. So,
that's a good comparison, though. Really, that is a good comparison as Finnegan's Wake, because those are about the only two texts. House of Leaves and Finnegan's Wake are about the only two that I will even try to read through, because most of the time this kind of thing on the page drives me nuts. I'm just not. I don't have time to have to turn a page and read something aloud every time I want to sit down and read a book. But I do think that is a good comparison. You're right that it's not quite,
it's not quite as maddening.
Quite there. But
you don't need to have a working knowledge of 5 languages.
You don't need an appendix or an annotated. When I read Finnegan's Wake, I had Finnegan's Wake and I had the annotated part of Finnegan's Wake, which was bigger than Finnegan's Wake itself, and I was literally reading both books at the same time.
Well, that's the only way to get through that monstrosity, and I mean that in a loving way, because but it is a difficult tome.
And this, listeners, is why recently on the Ladies of the Fright podcast, I said I was never going to read Finnegan's Wake.
Listeners, I propose if we get 10 more patrons on our Patreon.
No.
We'll do an entire episode of Mel just reading Finnegan's Wake and screaming.
I could do that, I guess. I like the end of the semester, and I'll do it.
I like to tailor my tortures to precisely fit the person. Now, one thing, speaking of kind of the, we've mentioned this kind of meta narrative. I have not read the entire pilot. I only read like maybe a third of it. But one of the things I did like is the this hallway, the 5.5 minute hallway, was supposed to be, of course, filmed, and they were going to show it. But what was basically happening is you had these like talking heads on television debating whether or not it was real or a hoax. Which I thought was really fascinating. I mean, that kind of thing would tickle me to watch. It could just there were a bunch of different like critics, saying, well, anybody could do that. In any, pull any film student out of, a college class, and he could, fake that long hallway, and debating whether or not it was real or what they might be trying to get out of it. And that went on. I mean, the whole talking head bit went on for quite a while. And I thought, I don't know, that just struck me as funny and really very true too, because anytime you have something supernatural, the first thing you have is people trying to explain why it's not real. And I do like that. So that's all I'll say about the pilot. I still think it is absolutely unfilmable, but I do like what he's doing there. Well, I don't want to talk about Daniel Lusky forever, even though we could. But since we're talking about new media and we are doing this on a podcast, why don't we get really into our own meta narrative and talk about some of the horror literature that's growing out of podcasts?
Oh, I think that's well worth the exploration. Lisa, since you started or broached the topic, do you want to start off with talking about this?
I can. I've listened to quite a few. And by this we're talking about, I guess, fiction horror podcast. I've listened to, I'm trying to think of the ones that I have listened to. I listened to Night Vale. Mel, I think you turned me on to that one. Welcome to Night Vale.
Yeah, that's a good one. Though I broke off on it. I need to get back into it.
Yeah, I was about to say that was one I never finished. Just because I didn't. I will confess something to our listeners. Y'all know I have kids, and when they were really little, I lived off of podcasts. Like, I existed on podcasts and audiobooks because that's what I had time for. And I would have them playing constantly. And then I realized I was listening to one podcast, and I realized that my older son was sitting in the back of the car. We were driving around running errands, and was repeating back some of the things that were being said in the podcast. And it wasn't anything bad, but I was just like, okay, I've got to stop listening to the creepy stuff or the weird stuff. Well, before he like runs off to preschool and says something strange to the teacher. So there were a lot of these that I got cut off like right in the middle of, and I have not picked up again. I have full intention of doing that. Welcome to Night Vale. I only got partially through. Same thing with that Alice Isn't Dead, which wasn't that a kind of a spinoff of Night Vale? Or the same people? Or
yeah, it's the same people. Yeah.
Yeah. So I enjoyed that one, but again, I only listened to a few episodes. The one, there were a few more that I listened to. Well, Pseudopod, we've done some things with them, and they do like short stories, but talking about kind of the long form. I've listened to a few more, but my favorite was Limetown, and I did finish that entire. I think it was 2 seasons, maybe.
Yeah, I think there's 2.
Anyway, I loved Limetown. That I would have to say that was my hands down favorite. And I liked the narrative. For those of you who, I won't say much about it if you don't know, because I think they've turned it into a TV show now that I have not watched. But it's basically about this like an NPR type reporter doing a podcast, so it fits the medium, and she goes to investigate this small town in Tennessee, which I'm from Tennessee, so that kind of tickled me. But it goes to this small town in Tennessee that basically everybody has vanished. It was kind of one of these company towns that was built up really quickly, and all the people living there just disappeared one day and nobody knows what happened. And so she goes to investigate this, I mean, really a ghost town, and the mystery behind it. And it just gets weirder and weirder from there. I don't want to say too much because if you haven't listened or you haven't watched the TV show, I don't want to spoil things, but it was fun. That one was a lot of fun.
I'll say this because I got into them. I mean, I've liked podcasts for ages and ages, but I kind of would go through fits and starts with times where I would listen to lots of podcasts and times when I would be busy and wouldn't really keep up with much at all. And around the time that the first season of Serial finished wrapping, which of course Serial was one of those like big hit, like kind of pop culture moments for podcasts, that was when I stumbled on the Black Tapes, which have either of you listened to the Black Tapes?
I
Yeah,
did. I listened to that. Yeah.
Yeah, I did
Yeah,
too.
like-
I didn't. I still have 3 or 4 episodes to go, but yeah, I listened to it.
Yeah, I've still got to honestly listen to season 3. Unfortunately, it came out at a time when I was just too busy, and I just have not had a chance to sit down and listen to them all. But same sort of format, Lisa, like Limetown, where you've got, I think in this case it's Pacific Northwest Radio, but it's essentially it's in a fictionalized NPR, and the host Alex Regan sounds a lot like Sarah Koenig from Serial. Like she's really got that delivery as that NPR sort of personality. And I mean, it hooked me in. I used to listen to them when I was running, and it was like this perfect thing. It was, they were, 30 to 45 minutes. And so it wasn't like an audiobook that would be stretched out over long periods of time. They were short, digestible episodes with an ongoing story. And man, like it was really good. And it really was this like great return to form of this like long form serialized audio drama that I don't think we've really had between the radio era and now, because television and movies are so very visual. And that's the nice thing about these podcasts, is they're doing great things telling stories with just the audio, and without being cheesy, without just making a bunch of noise to like jump scare you, but actually like setting a mood and building a story. In this case, for those of you that aren't familiar with the Black Tapes, it's sort of this faux NPR investigation of this like psychology guy who has offered up this reward if you can give him verifiable proof of like paranormal activity. And it starts off sort of this very X-Files-y thing where it's like she's listening to different tapes that he has that are questionable, and then it goes on from there and has its very ongoing plot that I, much like you with Limetown, I'm not going to spoil or anything, but yeah, like it's just a really interesting, refreshing new take on storytelling that I think the podcast genre really breathed new life into.
I really like these ones that do that, Matt, like you were talking about, these kind of serialized long form, because there are some really good, if you just want like a quick kind of spooky story, in your drive to work, that's kind of one and done type thing. Like their Pseudopod is one of those that tells short fiction that's really good.
No Sleep podcast.
Or No Sleep, or even something like Lore or Spooked, which tells, kind of quote unquote true stories, or like spooky history, that kind of thing. And those are fun and I enjoy them, but they don't stick with me the way these kind of serialized ones do. I like to see the way it kind of slowly unfolds. And if you get in early on a lot of these where you don't have the backlog to listen to, it is kind of fun having to wait a week or two, because we're in the kind of culture of binge listening and binge watching things. And as much as I love that, sometimes I've noticed that if I find a podcast that, say, everybody's been talking about and it's been out for a while and I can go back and binge from the beginning, it doesn't stick with me as long. like I listened to it. I'm like, okay, that was really enjoyable. I was really into it while I was listening, but it doesn't stick with me. And I think maybe that's why Limetown, I mean, it's a really well told story. Or the Black Tapes was like that too. But I found those relatively early. So I was listening as they came out. And there's something fun about that. And I think our current culture is missing a lot of that. Yeah. And I will say, I do remember now that you're talking about it, the Black Tapes. This is the only thing I'll say about this because I don't want to spoil anything. But that episode they did on the unsound really got under my skin.
That was when I when I first started listening to it. I don't remember who. A friend of mine on Facebook mentioned it, and it was one of those. I'm not sure if this is a real investigative thing or if this is fictional. And that was the episode that like had me leaning towards, oh yeah, this is fiction. But yeah, that episode on the unsound, yeah, it was definitely unsettling. And I was like, wait, what if this is true? And then I got to overthinking things. But
it is. I'll just, if y'all have not listened, that like we'll just dangle that in front of you and just go listen and find out what the unsound is because it was deliciously creepy.
Yeah, her descriptions of what she's seeing on the tapes is just creepy. It works really well. And what she's even hearing,
it's one of those things too where how sometimes in like haunted house movies where like you get frustrated because like one of my biggest complaints about the first Paranormal Activity movie was that they stayed in that house longer than any regular rational person would have, and that kind of broke that reality of it where oh, I'm watching this found footage thing, it feels very real. Oh, why haven't they gotten the heck out of this place? They do a really good job on Black Tapes and its companion Tanis, which is another very interesting one. The host of Tanis appears on Black Tapes as the quote unquote producer of Black Tapes. They do a really good job of explaining why it is that she's recording and making it actually feel realistic. Like, oh, this is why she's recording. And like you said, Mel, describing what she's seeing or hearing and that sort of thing without it feeling too hokey as to like, okay, why is she still standing around there with a tape recorder? Why hasn't she left yet? Like they do a good job of that. I'll definitely give them accolades for that.
Yeah, I enjoyed Tanis. I think I'm not sure that I have any missing seasons on that, but I was listening to that when I had to wait a week to hear it. And I agree with Lisa. There's something to having to wait for stuff rather than just binge it all in one sitting that makes it, I don't know, creepier, or it makes you remember more.
Well, before we run out of time, I guess I did want to sort of get one more topic out there to talk about, since we're talking about new media and in particular internet horror, and that would be sort of if Danielewski's House of Leaves only exists because the internet helped get it published, I think there are things like Black Tapes and Tanis and Limetown that exist because of the internet, because they're podcasts. There's one other thing which we've been kind of circling around, which would be the creepypasta type things, which I guess the most famous one being the Slender Man, but there are a lot of other stuff from creepypasta that well, let me back up. What do y'all know about creepypasta?
I don't know very much. I mean, I know it's kind of really short, what's the word I'm looking for? Like copyable kind of horror stories that end up on the internet and then kind of go viral. Like I know Slender Man, I think, was related to that. But other than that, I don't know a whole lot about creepypasta.
Yeah, I'm kind of like Mel. I have not read too much. I know Slender Man because of all the stuff that happened with the news and because apparently they made a not so great movie about Slender Man. I'm almost positive it was a Lifetime movie too. But one thing I do find fascinating, and I would love to do a little bit of research into this, is that the best, when I was trying, because creepypasta is such a weird name. Like, let's just say that. And and so when I was first trying to figure out what creepypasta was, and then somebody, and I don't remember who, and I'm sorry to whoever I was talking to, um, but somebody explained it to me that basically it's an urban legend on the internet. Because like I grew up at sleepovers, we would tell each other urban legends. And it was remarkable how no matter who you were talking to, like now as adults, I can talk to somebody. I grew up in Tennessee. I can talk to somebody who grew up in California or like Oregon or something. And they had very similar urban legends. They all kind of had the same basic core story, but they were, depending on who was telling it, little details would get added or changed, or little bits of the story would get changed or taken off or added on. And so it was this like malleable storytelling form. And from what I understand, and Matt, I don't know if you know more, but like, isn't creepypasta essentially the same thing just on the internet? Like somebody throws out kind of an urban legendy type story, and then as different people tell it and pick it up, they add to the lore.
That's pretty much my understanding of it. Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, if you go to the like creepypasta.com, what's interesting is, I mean, they're all short stories, and a lot of them, they will, if you just click on one from the main page, they will kind of give you even an estimated reading time, and some will be like 4 minutes or 18 minutes or things like that. So I mean, these are not long, in-depth things that you'll be reading, but yeah, I think internet urban legends is a great way to describe it, because yes, like Slender Man is one of the ones. I think there's one that's called Jeff the Killer, which one of my stepsons was briefly obsessed with. And now as far as the name, I don't know the ordering of this. I don't know which came first, but I know that there's a like running joke on kind of the internet whenever somebody on like an online forum reposts something that has been posted before and shared before, and usually it's with the intent of kind of like getting upvotes or likes or whatever for sharing somebody else's content and kind of passing it off as your own. People used to say, "Oh, that's copy pasting," and then it kind of got turned into calling it copy pasta. Like, you copy pasted it because paste and pasta sound similar. I don't know if that came first or if creepypasta came first, but I can totally see creepypasta coming from that copy pasta thing, because they're short stories that can be told, and other people can tell similar stories in the same universe, like adding, like you said, Lisa, adding to the story or the lore of the legend, so to speak. So it's definitely interesting stuff, and I mean, it's been around for, I think creepypasta was started in, I want to say, I saw that it was like the website started in like 2008 or so. So I mean, we're talking, it's been around for a good chunk of the internet's life, as it were.
Well, I really am glad that you explained just that the copy pasted to copy pasta to creepypasta makes a whole lot of sense.
Right. And I'm not 100% sure that I'm not being anachronistic, because I don't know which of those came first, but I want to say that creepypasta is a play on the copy pasta. I mean, like you said, it just makes sense. But listeners, if I am wrong on that, please point it out. Let us know.
Speaking, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, that was it. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just thinking, because, I don't know much about creepypastas. Like I said, I haven't read too many of them. I knew Slender Man was kind of the most famous one, but that sci-fi TV show Channel Zero, that the first season, Candle Cove. Do y'all remember that? The poster had the weird like person that was made up of teeth.
No,
I don't think
remember this at all.
I don't remember it. No.
Okay, well there was it was it was a half decent show. It wasn't anything like mind blowing, but it was half decent. And I've heard subsequent seasons are pretty decent. But Candle Cove, I'm almost positive started as a creepypasta on the internet. And it was a story that people would tell because it involves a television show that didn't really exist, but these kids remember watching when they were young.
Oh, like a Mandela
Um,
effect kind of thing.
yeah, kind of one of the but it becomes increasingly like worrisome as they're kind of getting together and talking about it and kind of like, I remember watching this puppet show when I was little on TV. Do you not remember? Oh yeah, we watched it. Well, it doesn't exist. We looked it up. Blah 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 blah. And that's kind of the start of it. It's a fun concept, but I'm pretty sure and I think there are a few more things that we might not recognize as originating as creepy pastas that are kind of circulating out there now as in like the horror landscape. But now that I'm thinking about it, that Candle Cove, I'm almost positive started that way. Because I remember looking it up when I watched that season, and finding kind of the original quote unquote legend. When I was younger, I loved reading books about urban legends. About whenever we travel to a new place, how they always sell those like books that, those little cheaply made tourist books that tell you all the ghost stories and legends of the area. I used to always love those. And I think if I was just a little bit younger and had grown up more with the internet, I probably would have been really into this. Just the idea of telling spooky stories online.
Oh, absolutely. And I was going to add on top of that, with creepypasta, there's also, I mean, we mentioned it kind of in passing when you were talking about Pseudopod, that there's also the No Sleep podcast, but that's actually a podcast that got started because it was sort of a collection of some of the best stories that were posts on the subreddit on Reddit, the No Sleep subreddit. So that's another kind of a new media podcast that only existed because of Reddit. So, but the No Sleep stories are a lot like the creepypasta stuff, where it's short form horror that's meant to be fairly quickly read, but easily spread, if you will, easily shareable.
I like it.
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's probably more multimedia and even internet horror that we could talk about, but in the interest of time, I think we should wrap up this episode at this point, or else we'll end up going on for over an hour. But right before we end, just a quick reminder that your co-hosts, Lisa and I, wrote a nonfiction book about the women who have written horror and dark speculative fiction titled Monster, She Wrote. It's out now, and you can get your copy by going to the Quirk Books website or through any major book retailer. And we here at the No Fear Cast would love to hear from you. We're at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram, and we have a Facebook page. If you'd like to contact us by email, send us an email at nofearcast@gmail.com. We do like getting emails, so if you have anything, if you'd like to correct us on something, if you'd like to add something to a discussion we've had or ask us any questions, please contact us. And if you like what we're doing, consider supporting us on Patreon and get access to exclusive content. So in between our weeks when we have main episodes, we have shorter mini episodes that maybe get to something we didn't have time to talk about in the main episode or flesh out some sort of topic. But if you would like something to do to support us that is free, you can simply rate and review us, or you could tell a friend. All of those methods help other listeners to find us. Thank you for listening, and we will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.